talk a little bit about the background for the Fifth Lateran Council, but try to save space or get us to the end of the council. We'll just look at a few of the things a little more in depth. Really, one of the big issues is that Ferrara, beginning with Constance and then at Florence, neither one really got around to reforming the church from the inside. So there's that need to reform the Curia, which has gotten a little too bloated, a little too powerful. Problems of nepotism, especially in the Italian Renaissance, when certain families become Italian families and Spanish families become very powerful. One of the side effects of the Italian Renaissance is a collapse in morals in Italy. I think there's a figure that over half of the Italian princes and heads of state during the 1500s were illegitimate births, and that the amount of violence and just complete disregard for the moral teaching of the church was rampant. So maybe looking at our own day when we can tend to despair of things, we can look back and see, yeah, it's been that bad before, so not to totally despair. One of the things that fostered the calling of the Fifth Lateran Council was a political conflict with France. So in the late 1400s, 1494, France had invaded Italy and was putting a lot of pressure on the papal states in Italy, as well as certain other allies of the papal states. So the Pope, especially after the Council of Florence, that attention to the political life of the papal states really perhaps doesn't serve the overall church's best interest. Although the worldly interest of those families, we can see that, but it gets in the way. And this brings up an issue that had been there from after the Council of Florence. During the council, during that period of schism between Basel and Ferrara, the French king at the time, Charles VII, mind you, this is the one that St. Joan of Arc helped get to the throne, the same King Charles, declared what he called a pragmatic sanction. So the Pope was very weak at this time. He's playing the two off of each other. And this pragmatic sanction sharply curtailed papal governance of the church in France, almost saying that the king is running things here. You are a nice figurehead over there, and we'll have this agreement that we'll recognize you as a figurehead, that the power is here. The pragmatic sanction adopted some of the Council of Basel's decrees relating to financial levies by the church and the conferring of benefices. It also explicitly endorsed conciliar supremacy over the Pope, that of papal authority. It had widespread but not universal support in France, and it became the seedbed for what later became, in the 1600s and 1700s, Gallicanism, which in France is that belief, that theory that the church in France should be administratively independent of Rome. And this is one of the things that helps fuel the problems that lead to the French Revolution. In the midst of all this, we get Pope Julius II. He had been made a cardinal, along with his very corrupt brother, by an uncle of theirs, Pope Sixtus IV. So, late 1400s, 1500s, nepotism. That's one of our words to learn. Nepotism. And he himself was elected Pope in October 1503, following a 10-day papacy of Innocent III, and the two of them following the infamous Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia, the Borgia popes, who publicly claimed to have 7 illegitimate children before he became Pope. So this is one of the more scandalous figures to ever occupy the see. But again, there's no heresy being taught. The doctrine is not affected, but we're talking low morals, okay? And there is, and it is Pope Julius II who will begin the construction of the current St. Peter's Basilica and be the one who commissions Michelangelo to do the Sistine Chapel. So he's, some of his effects are still very noticeable if you go there. Between 1503 and 1511, Pope Julius engaged in a number of political disputes. Unfortunately, he spent far too much time on the battlefield and too little time in the chapel. And regarding the security of the Papal States, and he formed an alliance with Venice, Genoa, and Switzerland against France. So if in the 1000s, 1100s, 1200s, it was the Holy Roman Empire that was causing the Pope's headaches again and again, now it's the French kings that are causing the headaches. And but this Pope Julius probably overstepped his bounds, did more than was necessary to protect the integrity, and actually went on an aggressive war against France. And this provoked the French king, Louis XII, to talk to the Holy Roman Emperor, Maximilian, and the two of them agreed that it was time to call an ecumenical council. And going back to frequens, the popes had not reformed the curia and the papacy, and so it was time for the councils to step up and do it themselves. So Louis XII, the King of France, called a council to meet in Pisa. Again, Pisa is the spot and problem. And that a number of, I think 6 cardinals attended, and a number of French bishops. Julius II, in response, says, oh, I'm going to have a council as well. So this is the cause for the Fifth Lateran Council, the response to the council at Pisa. The first action was to excommunicate everyone who was attendance in Pisa. And that looks to be the only thing Julius II is interested in. Not really interested in church reform, just wants to address this is the true council, that is not. Interestingly enough, Henry VIII, the King of England at the time, condemned the actions of the King of France, saying, he who would lacerate the seamless garment of Christ and wantonly destroy the unity of the church. He condemns the actions of King Louis XII. And a few years later, so Lateran V is called, and this is called while the Papal States, Venice, Genoa, are waging war against France. Okay? And it opens on May 3rd, 1512, and it has 3 objectives: to end the schism with the French, because of this council, to reform the church, and to launch a new crusade against the Turks, who are now gobbling up Eastern Europe, one country after another. Between the opening of the council and Julius II's death in February of 1513, the council's main work consisted of condemning the French schism and the spurious council called by the French, and starting a commission to look at this thing called the pragmatic solution. That's all that was done. And Julius didn't seem to have much interest. Julius dies, and his successor is another name from the Renaissance that's probably well known to many, a Medici. Giovanni de' Medici, who had been made a cardinal as a teenager. If you think back to the Reform councils, the early Lateran councils, they made these specifications about qualifications for offices, bishops and so forth, a certain age, a certain education, a certain character, and we see this has collapsed. It is not being carried out. Leo X was the successor. He reopened the council, and by the 8th session in December of that same year, had reconciled with Louis XII of France, the king, and a number of the bishops and cardinals who were participating in that schismatic council. By and large, though, Leo X had no interest in reform of the church.